Hey guys, I'm Charles Neal. Welcome to my shop. This is the first in a series of project videos that we're going to be putting up just for you. And the one we're going to start with is one we call the Shenandoah Valley Quilt Rack. The reason being, of course, we live here in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, and that's where the original, which is right here, was found. Now, as the story goes, my aunt and uncle, or aunt, ever how you say it, was at an auction at an old plantation house not too far from here. And this is going back, I don't remember if it was the late 40s, early 50s, I'm not sure. Anyway, this quilt rack was in there. And they bought it. And I got my hands on it. And the thing I found with it was, I have no real clue exactly how far back it goes, other than to tell you the mortises and tenons and everything in it are all hand chiseled and so forth, so on. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit. But the design of it was so unique. It actually has a very geometric or contemporary flavor to it. And it also works well in a period environment. It's been a staple in our gallery forever. I think we've been making them 15, 20 years, and we have sold a ton of them. Everybody likes them. It's a very simple build, and it's a weekend project, and I hope you like it. And we're going to take a look at different ways of making it. But first, let's take a little bit of a look at the actual quilt rack. Now the one right here, this is our version of it. Now what we did was we improved the lines on it a little bit. We made it taller and we made it wider to better accommodate the modern day quilts and so forth. You know, with a good finish on it, they also make a nice towel rack in a bathroom. Okay, let's take a look at the original. As I said, if you look right here, this was actually built, it's missing now, but it was built with a through tenon that came through the mortise that we'll see just in a second, and it was wedged. You know, when I originally took this apart, it was pretty easy to do because it was used old hide glue, was a little bit in here. And somewhere along the line, somebody had actually toenailed a little nail in here, so I guess it was kind of getting a little bit wiggly in the top. And you can see I don't know if you can really see it that well on camera, but all of this has been hand chiseled and so forth. And you can see in different areas and whatever on it, you can see what appears to be pretty coarse bandsaw marks or whatever. So I really can't date it. I don't know how old it is, but I know it goes back that far. And one of the most, like I said, I really like the design, but one of the more intriguing things about it was it's not something I would have expected to have seen even back to the 50s. I wouldn't have expected that. It goes back further than that. But it's made out of walnut. That's the original. Okay, it's a simple build. I told you that. So what we're going to do is build one. And we're going to show you how we do it. And we're going to give you the patterns. All right, guys, now the material that I've chosen to make this out of is cherry and poplar. Now, what I did with I didn't have any 8-quarter poplar. Well, actually I do, but I realized a lot of times you're not going to have an 8-quarter. And 8-quarter gets a little expensive. So what I did was I just took 2 pieces of 4-quarter, laminated them together. I jointed them, put them through the drum sander to make sure that I had really good surfaces that I could, when I glued it together, I got what I wanted. I glued them up, I don't know, 5.5 inches. Give me plenty of meat to work with. And the object of the game is when I'm done, I've got as an invisible glue seam as I can get. You know, lots of clamps, glue them up tight. Then for the cherry, I'm taking a piece of full 8/4. Now, one of the things I did, if you'll notice, I've got a nice red face, but on the back side, I got a lot of sapwood. Now, this is something I would avoid normally, and I feel sure you would too. But in today's world, where most often the sapwood is not considered a defect except in walnut, you're going to run into it. Now, I chose this because it's got a lot of sapwood, because I know it's going to give me some finishing issues. So I chose it so that we could address them. So that's the products that we're going to use in the material. Okay, what I've done is I've got everything processed. Now I took everything to a final of 1 5/8. Now the quilt rack's going to wind up at 1 1/2, but like I said, once I've got it all together, I'm going to put it through the drum sander and take it down to the final 1 1/2 inches. But no matter what you do, you want to make sure your wood is processed nice and flat. So what I did, because my piece of cherry was too wide for me to get across my 8-inch joiner, is I went and split it down the middle, jointed one edge, then I split it, and that gave me something I could better control. And I could get across the joiner. So I jointed one face flat, went to the planer, planed it to a strong 1 5/8. Then I came back, ran it through the drum sander, just to be sure, and on an 80 grit, and made sure everything was dead flat, and took it to a 1 5/8. And you can look, you can see this stack, it's flat, it's straight. Then what I did was I jointed the edge again, just to be sure that I was parallel. Then I came back and I ripped everything to the width I wanted. Now the foot is 3 1/2 inches tall. So I simply ripped my stock 3 1/2 inches. Now with that said, I made the feet, I always cut my feet stock just a little longer. I don't try to go to an exact size at this moment. And these are about 13 1/2. So these are now 13 1/2 long, they're 1 5/8 thick, and they're 3 1/2 inches tall. Now, what I did here, because I want to show you a couple different ways of doing this. I cut my poplar feet to the exact same length. But you're going to notice that the poplar pieces for the uprights is much shorter. Actually, they're just enough that I can get the upright out of. Now that's going to pose us a problem. And the problem that's going to pose us is that we don't have enough to make a tenon on it. So we're going to look at we're not going to tell nobody, but we're going to use some biscuits. But we're going to do it the good old-fashioned mortise and tenon way on the cherry one. Now the cherry one, I'm at 41 and a half. Now that's far bigger than what I need, longer. But I want to be able to have a setup option. In other words, what am I talking about? I want to use this end of it to use as a test setup when I go to cut my tenon. Now, if you're at a point your wood will only allow you can't get some extra, try to find something that you can make that's going to be the same width and thickness. Process it right along with everything else so you have a scrap piece that you can use for setup. It's a big difference between measuring everything and a literal ensuring everything. Now what I'm doing now is I'm laying out for the mortise in the feet on the cherry. The mortise is going to be 2.5 inches, and it's going to be 5/8 of an inch wide, right here. Now the way I laid it out, I took my foot, and from this point to this point is 4 inches. So I drew a center line. I set it on my piece of wood to make sure that I could have plenty of wood to get my foot cut out of. Marked it, drew a center line. Then from the center line, I went 1.25 inches on both sides. Now when I did it, I set it up. Before I did that, I set it up and I marked it because I've definitely got a left and a right. So you notice this says out, same thing on that side. That's just my little note telling me that this is going to be the outside of the foot. Now there's something I'm going to show you that you're going to think a little strange maybe. I'm putting this sapwood on the outside of the quilt rack. You may think that it would be better to put it on the inside where it wouldn't be quite as visible. That's actually not the case. The reason I'm putting it on the outside is I've got a complete blank there. I don't have the rungs or anything to deal with. And I'm going to have to do some coloring technique here. And to be able to do it on the outside without any obstruction is going to be a whole lot easier to deal with than if I've got to try to work it all in around the rungs. That's simple. If I've got to do coloring on something, I want it where I can get to it. And it's the easiest for me to deal with. All right, so this is going to be my foot. I drew my center line, 1.25 inches on each side, which equates to 1.5 inches, 2.5, I'm sorry. Then I came back, marked the center line, found my dead center of this. Then, once I had my center marked, then I measured 5/16, which is half of 5/8 to the right of it or left of it, doesn't matter. Then I simply set a combination square to it, to that point, and marked it. Now, I use these gel rollers all the time, or gel pens, whatever you want to call them. They got a pretty fine tip. But they're wide enough that you need to decide whether you're leaving the line or taking the line. All right, now we're ready to mortise it. Now I'm going to mortise this on my stationary mortiser. I'm going to use a 3/8 chisel, and I'm going to mortise one side, then I'm going to flip it around and mortise the other side. That will, in other words, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in this way, then I'm going to flip it and go the other way, and that's going to ensure my mortise is dead center in my piece of wood. Now, you could just as well just take go to a drill press or even a hand drill and drill this out, take a chisel and chisel it. Now, I'm going to make this mortise 1 inch deep. That's a little deep. But the reason I'm going to do it is that I'm going to peg this joint so that you can see it. And you'll see the benefit of that after a little bit. Now, I want to lay this out on my upright because there's something that can happen. This piece of material is cut at 4.5 inches. So that means I'm going to mark a center at 2 1/4. And if I mark, and I've got my center line denoted on my foot. Now you'll notice my sapwood's up on both sides. Right and out on there. Okay. Now, when I squared this up, these ends, the way I did it was on a table saw with a miter slide. I've got a chop saw and other things. I prefer, when I can, to cross cut on a table saw. The rotation of the blade and everything will give me as smooth and nice a cut as I can get. Okay, now what I used, I think, was a 60-tooth carbide or something. Here's my center line, but I could get an issue here. Always check this. I'm going to set my foot pattern on here, making sure that the way it's going to set, and I'm going to set it center line to center line. Then I've got a center line marked on my upright, and I'm going to line it up. But I've got an issue. And my issue is right here at this back edge, I'm probably about a 1/16 of an inch from my pattern having enough. In other words, the pattern's hanging over about a 1/16. Now that's the reason you always want to cut this member a little bit wide. And the reason that it's in a pure square and everything's equal is so we can cut the tenons much easier. But here's what I can do. If you can see right here, I've got some space. In other words, I'm wider than my foot. I'm 4.5, my foot is 4. So I've got a little bit of room to play. If I actually move this way, then I can get that to come in and make sure it's in a line, make sure I've got enough room to get my cut. I'm good right there. I've got about 1/8 of an inch overhanging. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to denote this as being my center line. Now once that's done, I also want to translate that to where my mortise is going to come in. In other words, what I'm going to do is I'm setting this up and I'm going to lay out, I'm going to mark where my mortise is going to have to be. And you'll notice in this case it's an offset. In other words, this is deeper than this. It's not going to be an issue. All I'm going to have to do when we cut the tenon is just adjust that depth, and we'll come in just fine. But always make sure you're going to get what you want. Now, while we're on that, I'm going to show you something with the biscuit one. There's another way of doing this, and I talked about the biscuits. Oftentimes, as in the case with that big 10-inch piece of cherry that we cut up, if you've got a piece, these things can have a lot of waste to them. If you've got something like that, you can actually come in here. Let's assume this is one piece of wood. And I've oftentimes been able to come in and draw it out like this, then maybe have to flip it and come in like this, and I can get 2 uprights out of a whole lot less wood. That simple. Saves a lot of wood. And in doing that, a lot of times, depending on the width, I'm able to come back in and get a foot and a foot. Saves a ton of wood. But when I do that, in order to do that, I've got to rough saw this out. So I don't have a nice square piece of wood in order to be able to make the tenon on it nicely. And in the same token, sometimes a piece of wood is not going to be long enough. So how do you handle it? I'm going to show you. Now remember, we're going to be biscuiting. So here's what I can do. If I've got a piece cut out, now this is going to work out because we're the same width. But assuming for a moment, we all know about that assume thing. But let's just think about this a minute. If I'm trying and I've got a pattern and this is just roughed out, and this thing is actually trying to, I can't get it. In other words, it's setting like this or whatever. I can simply saw this on an angle, which will twist it one way or the other and allow me, see for example, where this is hanging over, if this were just a roughed out piece and this is hanging over, by cutting a little angle here, that's going to take this, throw it back, and allow me to get my upright cut. Pretty simple. And bearing in mind that we're going to biscuit this, it's going to be pretty easy to go together. Okay, I hope you understood that. All right, I'm going to go now and I'm going to mortise these two pieces of cherry for the feet. After we do that, then we're going to cut the tenons. Or as a friend of mine used to call them, we're going to cut them pinions. I don't know where he got that, pinions. Okay, let's go mortise. All right, all I'm doing now is just cleaning up the bottom a little bit and making sure my sides are decent and nice and all that good stuff. You know, I've cut mortises just about every way you can think of. Routers and chisels and, man, I've drilled and chiseled more mortises than I care to think of. So ever how you do it, just try to make sure it's center. And remember, we're 5/8 by an inch deep. Okay. Mortises. They'll do. Let's make some tenons. In a hurry to do this, what I did was, when I cut my mortise, I'm actually about 15/16. I'm not quite at an inch. But it's not going to matter because it's going to all come off in the length anyway. But that's important because I don't want to have to be messing with it. So, you know, now what I'm going to do, a place to start is I've got my dado blade and I'm going to set it on my saw, and I've got the highest tooth set right at the edge of my mortise. That should put me pretty close. So I'm going to measure this, make sure I'm at, to my outside edge, I'm at 15/16. If I'm a little hair less than that, that's a good thing. That being about a 32nd. That's going to give me a little bit of glue relief down in there, and it's going to make sure that puppy socks down nice and tight. Now I'm going to make a test cut to make sure on my depth. But before I do that, there's something else I want to do. Always, always, double check, keep a check, make sure that you're square. Make sure you're square to your fence. And of course, common sense says you got to make sure you're square on your blade. In other words, the space from here to here and here to here is the same. Okay, we're going to cut it. Now all I'm going to do, now this is my good end. So I'm just taking a little bit up here off the top where I've got the extra just to confirm what I need to do. Now in the event you don't have, I'm pretty snug there. In the event that you don't have a dado blade, you can do the exact same thing. It takes a little longer. You can take a saw blade and just nibble it off. All right, I'm gonna raise this just a little bit. All right. Now I'm going to make sure that I can get my pattern. If y'all hear a bunch of rumbling, there's a bad storm going on outside. Everything's going to work. Everything's going to fit. This is my center line. And what I'm translating is my center line off of my mortise. Then I'm going to also trace on here, mark on here. And you can see, again, this is narrower and this is wider. I'm kind of using the same exact technique. I'm just going to eyeball this and try not to get, because I don't want to move my fence. So I'm going to eyeball this. I can also draw a line on the end of the mortise to get it translated a little better. Just remember one thing. Raising the blade takes more off, lowering it leaves it on. You can always take a little more off. That add-on thing, that gets to be a little bit more difficult. Okay, I'm going to check where I'm at. tenon. Now my problem here is I'm a little bit tight, a little too tight. You want a tenon where you can tap it together. Basically, you don't want to have to drive it and beat it. That's too tight. Because you do that, then you pretty much lose a lot of your glue effect. So I'm going to take a little shoulder plane. I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. Just reduce the thickness of it just a little bit. All right. I'm okay on width. I'm still a little bit fat right here. Still on? Okay. Little chisel, little rasp. Just make sure it's going together nice. Still a little snug up here at the top. Now, I want to show you this. Whether it was me, whether I'm a little teeny bit, there's a little teeny, in other words, shoulder right here. And that's where, when I came through this way, it cut just a little more. It could have been whoever, whatever. It can happen. So how do you handle something like that? Because it's going to give us a gap in there. Well, that's where a little shoulder plane can really, really help you. Here's the trick. Take the end of the tenon and kind of do a little back bevel on it, just a little bit. It's not going to hurt our strength because it's going to give it, but what that's going to do is allow me to lay this in here a little bit on the side. And I can just simply clean it up, blend them together. It's also doing a little back angle on this, which allows me to sneak up on this final edge here. I can do the same thing a little bit with the rasp, but I don't want to do it straight. I want to do just a little bit of an angle. Now that's a trick that a lot of guys know about in fitting. You know, when you really got to get it really, really tight, is you do a little bit of a back cut right in here. You just pare out a little bit of that material, and it kind of gives a little bit of a glue space as well. But the other thing that it does is that it makes the outer perimeter of the fit be extremely tight. Now I don't want to get too carried away with this because I'm at 1 5/8 inches and I'm going to be taking about 1/16 of an inch off on both sides of this. So I don't want to get this, if I back cut it a little bit, I want to keep a good heavy shoulder up here, because when I sand it, if I don't, I can actually create a gap. Understand that? I think so. How am I looking? That'll do. Now, just to be sure, let me get my full-size pattern here and make sure. Y'all gonna have to tell me, can I get it? Am I gonna get it all in? Oh yeah, easy, not a problem. All right, one down. All right, I'm gonna get the other one done, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna look at the biscuiting.